I think the key differentiator here in this consensus process is the introduction of verifiable randomness, the verifiable random function to help select different segregated roles within the consensus process. What is up, Hash Nation? Today is Tuesday, and you know what that means. It's Token Talk Tuesday. And today we have another hotly requested topic, and that is ontology. I'll tell you what you need to know about ontology in 2019 and share my overall thoughts. Let's hash it out. And guys, really quickly before we get started, if we're just meeting, my name is Forrest. I'm a blockchain developer in industry, and I really started this channel to help you build your knowledge, boost your cryptocurrency gains, and to help you join the movement towards our decentralized distributed future. And if that sounds good to you, you want to join that movement, just smash that subscribe button down below and hit that little bell notification button so that you'll be notified whenever I post a new video. Thank you guys so much in advance, and let's jump into the overall review of ontology. So what is ontology? Ontology is a blockchain platform that's targeted at enterprise adoption, enterprise use, and more specifically, it's a platform that's purposefully built to be easy for different enterprises and different businesses that are of all shapes and sizes to build on blockchain technology, to use blockchain technology, but still maintain some private data and maintain some of the features that they're used to with their legacy systems. Ontology is also built in a way that it's very easy to use. You don't have to have a bunch of blockchain experience within your enterprise, within your business to go ahead and build with ontology and to use ontology. And so that's one of the ways that ontology is looking to bring adoption, drive adoption for their blockchain platform. And right up front, one of my favorite things about ontology is the clever name and the clever wordplay therein. The definition of ontology is super relevant to blockchain, so I'm gonna read that definition to you and tell me what you think. Ontology is the metaphysical study of the nature of being, becoming, existence, or reality. Ontology deals with questions about what things exist or can be said to exist. So we all know that blockchain's all about state. It's all about keeping an immutable record of the state of things at a certain point in time, whether present or whether in the past. And all that has to be done without a central authority to tell us what that state is. It's agreed upon by the network by way of consensus. So the concept of ontology, meaning the state of being or what can be, I think is very relevant to blockchain overall, and I think it's a very clever name. So I'm a sucker for that type of stuff. You may not care about the name, but I just thought it was cool. Ontology was created by a company called On-Chain, and they're a Chinese company run by Da Fei and Eric Zhang. You may recognize those names because they are the names of the two folks who also helped create Neo. They were the founders of Neo as well. And this company On-Chain really drives the development of both of these projects, Ontology and Neo. And those projects, again, because they're created by the same people, have some code reuse between the two. We'll talk about that later, but also they're intended for two different purposes. So even though they're created by the same company, they have a lot of the same technology behind it, they're both used for different things and they have different purposes. So make sure that throughout this video, you're considering the fact that they are interoperable, the two platforms, but they're for different purposes. And ontology itself is more of a blockchain as a service platform. And if you're used to the idea of software as a service out there in industry, it's very popular. A lot of companies do this. So rather than having to build something completely from scratch, deploying it on your own infrastructure and running it that way, you can basically go out and procure this service, blockchain as a service or software as a service, and run it without having to do all that custom work. And then you can obviously build on top of that. You can customize and work with it a little bit, but it makes it really easy to start. And that's the key here for adoption. It needs to be easy to start and easy to maintain. And one thing to get straight before we really dive into some of the more technical details and how it works, ontology is really a collection or an interoperable group of separate blockchains. And each enterprise or company is gonna have their own blockchain network, and they're gonna wanna purposefully share data, but also keep some to themselves. So ontology, the platform itself, is a base layer of distributed ledger or blockchain that helps connect a bunch of different disparate public blockchains or public/private blockchains, however you wanna think about it, that are owned by different enterprises. We'll talk more about that later, but just so that you have a good idea of what this is all about. Now, what problem is ontology trying to solve? Because on this channel, I like to stay rooted to the actual problem at hand. And if a platform has a good target for a problem, that's a good sign. So let's talk about the main problem that Ontology is trying to solve. Problem number one is that enterprises and big business, a lot of people are very, very against blockchain. A, because they're threatened by it, because their business is threatened by it. B, because they lack the overall knowledge or education or someone to sit down and explain why blockchain is beneficial to them. And finally, that a lot of businesses are scared to let go of control. They're scared to let go of their data and have it in a public forum or a place where their users own more of the responsibility than they do. And that is something that happened during the internet age, and that's something that's happening again now. It's a problem that we're going to have to solve, and that's one of the main ones that Ontology is looking to solve. And then the second side of this problem overall is something I mentioned briefly before, but it's that a lot of these big businesses and small businesses, to be honest, find blockchain to be a risk to their business, whether a risk in the sense that it's a competing effort or it's a competing technology with what they do for a living and they are disrupted by it, or that it's a risk in employing blockchain and that they fear they're going to get left behind by not doing it. But if they do, they're afraid that they're going to be at legal risk or they're going to mess it up somehow and the data is going to get exposed, whatever. They see it as a risk, and that's a problem. Now, as someone who builds Ethereum applications for a living, and I've been working with the other platforms as well, and working with clients to do this, I can't tell you how accurate these statements are and how real these problems are. There are so many businesses out there that maybe want to employ blockchain, but they're too scared to. And there are even more companies out there and even more organizations and even just individual people out there who see blockchain and don't understand what it is and think it's only Bitcoin or it's only Ethereum, and they don't understand what the application is. And so that is part of the thing that we all have a responsibility to fix, and that's to educate others. But Ontology wants to make it easy and also more purposeful and more attuned to the enterprise needs related to blockchain without sacrificing too much of the visions of decentralization overall. There has to be some adoption from some forward-thinking big businesses, banks included, and financial services included, and there will be some that really dive in and make this real in their industry. And we need that. We need them to think about how they can implement this technology and this new way of thinking and doing business into their daily operations. The businesses that took advantage of the internet age and really integrated the internet and all the technology that came with it into their business really succeeded, and there are a lot of them today that have changed the game for everyone by taking advantage of the benefits of the internet. Netflix is one of them. They started out delivering movies in the mail, and they still could do that. However, they moved completely over to streaming for the most part because they knew the internet was powerful. And in doing this, Netflix made their offering more user-centric by taking advantage of the internet and its capabilities. They made it more user-centric in the sense that people can sit down, with the click of the button, watch content. And that is much more enjoyable than getting something in the mail and having to wait for it and return it and do all this other stuff. This time period right now with blockchain is the same. So this is an opportunity for big businesses to take their current business model and use blockchain technology and cryptocurrency to make it more user-centric, to make it more private, to make it more secure, to make it more effective and more efficient, and to just give power and responsibility back to the users and to their customers. So I encourage all businesses to try and do this. I encourage all businesses to step out of their comfort zone and change with the times, get ahead of the times, rather than getting stuck in the past and trying to hold on to control when it's not the way that things are going to be done in the future. So with all of these videos, we talked about the problem. Now we need to talk about the how. So how is Ontology going to address these large-scale problems of big business adoption and bringing this technology into the mainstream for some of these different enterprises without sacrificing immense amounts of the decentralization benefits that there are with blockchain? Ontology is aiming to deliver a neatly packaged blockchain solution platform that retains some of the core privacy and data control aspects that businesses need and integration points with their current systems, whilst also allowing public transactions, user-controlled identity and information sharing, and beyond that, integration with the neo-public blockchain for different smart contract applications, public transactions, and exchange of value. You can think of Ontology as a decked out bridge between enterprises' old systems, blockchain technology, and the overall neo-blockchain ecosystem down the line. So all in all, Ontology is looking to create a platform that addresses some of the key barriers to entry. And those main barriers to adoption are trust, data exchange, authorization, and digital identity. So let's talk a little bit more about how they're addressing those things. Ontology consists of a few key pieces that build up the platform overall, and I like to think of it as a blockchain sandwich. The base layer, or the bottom slice of blockchain bread, is the actual blockchain layer itself, and that encompasses the smart contract capability, the distributed ledger technology, and also integration points with legacy systems, databases, and applications that enterprises may use. Now, within this blockchain layer, multiple different blockchains can be created for each enterprise that all serve a different business purpose or serve a need. And these are called service blockchains. Now, these service chains can do all sorts of things that enforce business logic, that manipulate data, that translate data, do all sorts of different things. And those service chains can then feed that information or that data into interactive chains. And that's another type of blockchain within this overall Ontology platform. Those interactive chains are meant to be a layer where those interactive chains are meant to be a place where data can be shared with other enterprises or with users. So it's an interaction point or an integration point with other entities. So service chains can obviously keep some of that sensitive data, feed that into an interactive chain based on what information they want to share, and that can be then shared with customers or other entities. So as you can see, the blockchain infrastructure in Ontology is very interoperable and creates a really interconnected cross-chain ecosystem. Now, on top of that, I guess the meat and potatoes of this sandwich, I have eaten potatoes on sandwiches, it's very good, is the application layer. And this is where all the modular APIs, services, and different software capabilities are built into the platform. So there are a handful of different frameworks that come out of the box that are targeted at different industries, different enterprises, and that really helps things get started and obviously helps them perform better and eventually makes development easier when someone or an enterprise wants to build with Ontology. And this application layer encompasses the tools, the SDKs, the APIs that are required to build dApps on the Ontology blockchain, so that's another really important factor here. And finally, on the very top, the top piece of bread in this blockchain sandwich is the interaction layer, and that's where user interfaces can be connected. That's where different individuals, for example, in a data marketplace, can go and trade and exchange data. There are all sorts of different things that happen in this interactive layer, this interaction layer, but mainly you can think of it as the place where all the interoperability happens between all of these blockchains from a user interface perspective. Now, if a company wants to get on the Ontology bandwagon, they want to install it, they would basically take this blockchain as a service, they would procure it, they would go ahead and install and configure their Ontology blockchain network. Within that infrastructure, within that Ontology blockchain network, they'd have identity services, they'd have data store, they'd probably have some service chains that would help manage the data and facilitate what they need to do with that data. They might also have a decentralized application that really serves as a self-service place for their users to come and grab their data through an interactive chain. There's all sorts of different things they can do with it, but the Ontology blockchain architecture gives them that base layer to build from. And anything that's built with the Ontology package or the Ontology infrastructure is still interconnected and interoperable with other Ontology blockchain solutions. So theoretically, any enterprise could talk to any other enterprise and share data. It's all built on that same infrastructure, that same architecture. But there's also an element of privacy to their data. They have more control over their individual data stores and their individual legacy systems and the data that goes onto the blockchain overall. So it gives a little bit more privacy, a little bit more control, and yes, it does introduce some centralization at those individual points, but theoretically, all of these different places are interoperable. So let's take an example here. Let's just say company A wants to enter into an agreement on a smart contract with company B. And to do that, company A is going to have to share some of their financial services information, their financial reports, with company B. Now, company A probably has this information on their data store, they might have it in the service chain, and they're obviously continually keeping those records of transactions they've made. And if they want to share that information, they can choose to put that information out to an interactive blockchain that they share with enterprise or company B. This shows off the structure of the Ontology trust framework, the trust network. Basically, each individual enterprise or company has control over what data they're sharing and what information they want to put out there. and they can facilitate that through interactive chains. And then they also have their own service chains that can facilitate business rules. So yes, now this does give companies more control over what data they do share. And this isn't the full transparent, clean, decentralized system that everyone likes to talk about, but I think it could drive adoption in the future. Now, I just mentioned the trust framework or the trust network, and this is really the core of the Ontology platform. So we're going to spend some time talking about what this trust framework is and why you need to know about it. So the core functionality within the Ontology blockchain network, or the core goal, is really to establish this distributed trust framework between enterprises. So what does this mean? It means that Ontology was built with really the sole purpose of creating an interoperable blockchain-based infrastructure architecture on which different companies, enterprises, businesses, the like, could all talk to one another, but also maintain some control over their data. Obviously, you need to facilitate trust between these parties so that they will transact with one another, so that they will build things that work with each other, right? And to do this, you have to build a platform that not only facilitates that trust, but also one that has the enterprise features that all these businesses actually need to do what they do. Ontology has built out a lot of enterprise features, and I would say the number one enterprise feature that a lot of people that I've worked with look for and a lot of different businesses out there really need is digital identity. In almost all business processes and almost all things that you'll see out there in industry, there has to be some sort of way to establish someone's identity or to establish identity attributes. I'm not saying you need to get someone's DNA or genetic code so that they can apply for a loan. That is not what I'm saying. The world is rife with oversharing and lack of control of people's data. So there's no doubt about that. But there is a base need for businesses to verify A, that you're not being fraudulently represented by someone else. That's very important. And B, that they have the information they need to offer you services. So what we really need is an infrastructure or a place where people can own their attributes, they can own their data, and they can expose what they want to companies rather than the other way around. Nowadays, when you apply for a loan, you know your social security number. You have to give that to them, and then those people go and do a bunch of back-end research and learn about you, and you don't have any control over what they find, right? All of your information is out of your control, and it's all over the place. Your information, your identity is owned by other people and other businesses, and that's not the way it should be. So Ontology's built a platform that establishes a digital identity. So the way Ontology is doing this is they're giving people the ability to create their own Ontology ID, and this is algorithmically derived from their public key. And anytime they want to use this identity or they want to make an attestation on something about them, say their driving record, for example, it would check for their private key signature to make sure, hey, yeah, you own the private keys for this identity, that is you. So using something like this, you as the user own your identity information. You have all of that within your digital identity, and you choose, not the company, you choose what you want to share and when. And that is the key here. That's user-centric identity, that's self-sovereign identity, and that is where the world is going. That's where it has to go, and we can accomplish that. I'm glad that Ontology is thinking about this when they deliver these platforms, because then if you're working with multiple different enterprises on this blockchain ecosystem, then you still control your identity and you can tell each one of these different businesses what you want with this one identity. You don't have multiple usernames and passwords and all this jazz all in one place. That's user-centric. Question of the day, guys. Do you think digital identity is an important factor, and are you going to use it when it comes? Let me know in the YouTube card above whether it's yes, no, or absolutely not. I don't want any digital identity whatsoever. So speaking on that example of digital identity and how you can attest to information or you can share information that only you choose to, let's talk about how that's facilitated within the Ontology ecosystem. There are a couple of different ways. One of them is a more centralized way. The other is a much less centralized way. The more centralized approach is using a trust anchor or a trusted group to establish that trust between people and help make verifiable claims. And the more decentralized way is allowing users to establish trust between each other in due course and to make attestations about someone's trustworthiness over time. So let's take examples of this using the concept of a verifiable claim. And a verifiable claim could be something about your identity. So if I wanted to prove to you that I went to Virginia Tech and I studied computer science and business information technology, and I wanted to share that with you and prove that to you that I got that degree. I'd have to make a verifiable claim. You'd want to verify that and not just take my word for it. There are a couple ways to go about this verifiable claim, and the first one is this. To do this, I would reach out to the Virginia Tech School of Science, and I would ask the dean to make a claim that, yes, indeed, I did get the degree that I say I got. So in this scenario, they could issue a claim on the Ontology network saying, yes, this guy, Forrest Hashoshi, he got that degree. We can verify that because we're the ones who issued it. They're called the issuer in this instance. And so the issuer, in this case Virginia Tech, that dean, has made a claim about something that I've earned, or a credential, right? And I can share that claim with you to prove a certain identity attribute, right? So at this point, I've chosen what I want to share with you. I've gotten the issuer of that credential to confirm to you that I've gotten it. And this can be done both publicly or privately, so you can kind of protect your data. But at this point, using this structure, there's no way to really protect my identity. Maybe I don't want anyone else to know that I got that degree from this school, right? And I wanted to share it with you. That information's still pseudo-public. My identity is still tied to it. So there is a process being built for anonymous proofing and anonymous verifiable claims using zero-knowledge proofs. But that's a topic for another video because that's a serious rabbit hole. Now, like in all of these different Token Talk Tuesday videos, I want to talk about consensus. And Ontology has created a consensus mechanism that's really a blend of proof of stake, a verifiable random function or random number function, and Byzantine fault tolerance. And this consensus mechanism is called Ontorand Consensus Engine, or OCE for short. Now, the core functionality of OCE is branded Verifiable Byzantine Fault Tolerance, or VBFT. So let's discuss how VBFT works. The key in VBFT is that they use this verifiable random function, or random number function, that helps create true randomness within the selection of consensus making nodes. So within VBFT, there are two types of nodes. There are consensus nodes and candidate nodes. Consensus nodes are really responsible for verifying transactions, making blocks, overall maintaining this blockchain network. And candidate nodes, on the other hand, don't participate directly in consensus, but they help propagate and maintain the latest block on the overall Ontology ecosystem. Candidate nodes also are there to monitor the network status of the Ontology network overall, and they're there to verify blocks that have made it through consensus. These consensus nodes and candidate nodes are really part of the Trione's consensus nodes block production group, and let's talk a little bit more about that. In each round of consensus, the verifiable random function that we talked about earlier helps randomly select nodes to serve different roles in the consensus process. This randomness helps resist collusion, predictability, etc. within the consensus process, and it's a pretty solid way of doing it. Now, like I said, these different consensus nodes have different roles, and they're selected by the verifiable random function. These roles are as follows: a block proposer node, a block verifier node, or a block confirmation node. These roles are randomly selected and assigned during the consensus process, so each of these nodes can't really predict what role they're supposed to take until the very last moment. And that does indeed help overall protect from collusion and the overall predictability of the consensus process. So let's walk through this step by step. Block proposers are randomly selected through the process we just talked about, and each of them propose a unique block to the network. Then the randomly selected block verification nodes go in, verify that the proposed blocks meet the overall validation rules, and then they vote on the highest priority block to be mined and approved. And then finally, the randomly selected block confirmation nodes again verify that the proposed block winner does meet the verification rules, the validation rules of the network. They then confirm that block and write it to the blockchain. And then the consensus results from this process are propagated to the rest of the network, and the block producers, the participants in the consensus process, are awarded in ONG tokens. So in order to become a member of this consensus pool or a member of the candidate and consensus node group, you have to put a minimum stake of 200,000 ONT tokens forward as a stake to the Ontology Foundation. And this is basically a pay-to-play thing. You have to have a certain stake or skin in the game to participate. And the other thing you have to do to become one of these consensus nodes is you have to pass a KYC check with the Ontology Foundation. And this KYC check is just to make sure you're not a malicious party. It's to make sure you're not a terrorist group or whatever. So I understand why they're doing it. Now, I know anytime there's KYC, all of the decentralization fiends come out and say, there's no way you can do that. That's illegal. That's bad. Don't do it. In this case, I understand why you're not going to get enterprises to play unless you do some sort of KYC. Hopefully in the future there's a better solution, but right now it's probably necessary. Another thing to note here is that while the minimum stake within the Ontology network itself is 200,000 ONT tokens, the ones who are really the consensus nodes, the more powerful ones, are the ones who stake the most. So 200,000 is the minimum. Anyone who stakes more has more stake in the network. They're the ones who are given more responsibility and get those different roles in the consensus process. So that's one thing to note. And by that hand, I guess there is a risk of big whales dominating the network, but we shall see how that works out. I think the key differentiator here in this consensus process is the introduction of verifiable randomness, the verifiable random function, to help select different segregated roles within the consensus process. I think it's very interesting to see that they've split out the responsibility of consensus among different parties, so there's kind of that check and balance there. And beyond that, there's no predictability for who's going to have what role at any given time. There is some predictability about who is going to be in that pool based on stake, because that's the way that it works. But I really like the way that there's random functions that drive which role a person has or a node has in the consensus process. And the splitting of power between these parties makes it less likely that a malicious node or a group of malicious nodes can really do as much damage, because they don't know what power or what responsibility they're going to have in the network overall at any given time. Earlier this month, however, there was an issue with consensus where the authorization of stake for these different consensus and candidate nodes caused some sort of issue that brought the network to a halt. And that's definitely a concern, but it really does just draw more attention to the fact that all these platforms, including Ontology, under construction, they're under development, these things happen. The problem was repaired very quickly, was addressed very quickly. Hopefully they could avoid this type of issue in the future. It's also worth noting that the consensus and candidate node pool is going to grow over time. The idea is that as the Ontology network hits its max supply of tokens, there will be about 2,400 nodes in that pool versus the 40 some that there are now. And since we've talked about ONT and ONG and these tokens, you're probably wondering what the heck they are and what the supply is and all that sort of stuff. So let's talk about that now. So like NEO, Ontology is a 2-token ecosystem. There are 2 unique tokens, ONG and ONT. Now, ONT is an indivisible network token, like the NEO token is, meaning it can only be transacted in rounded numbers of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. It can't be divided into smaller fractions. While the gas token, or ONG, is actually divisible down into relatively small fractions, and that's used to pay for different network interactions, contract executions, function executions, transaction fees, so on and so forth. There's a total possible supply of 100 billion ONG and ONT tokens, and they're going to be slowly trickled down into the network and released over time. In the case of ONG tokens, 1 ONG token is released to the network in new supply for every second that the consensus process is running. So every second that a block is being produced, ONG tokens are being created. So at the current pace, it would take another 17 plus years, maybe close to 18 years, for all of the ONG tokens that are available, theoretically by the supply constraints, to be released to the network in volume. ONT inflation policy is very similar. It's a slow trickle down or release to the network over time. So that's one thing to note. Now, I mentioned the rewards in the consensus process before, and these are awarded in ONG tokens. So whenever ONG tokens are used for something, whether that be transaction fees or execution of a function, for example, those tokens go to the block producers, and they're split 50-50 between consensus nodes and candidate nodes for what they're doing for the network. Now, it wouldn't be a Hashoshi Token Talk Tuesday without some talk about the developer community and the developer tools that are out there for Ontology. So let's dive into that real quick. Having poked around in the GitHub and on the documentation for Ontology, I do have a few thoughts. The GitHub is very active. There are a lot of commits, and there are definitely code commits from 2019, so that's a good sign. Even though code commits and volume of code commits doesn't really mean all that much in terms of how valuable the code that's being written is, it's definitely good to see that the developer community is active and building things. And I think this comes from the fact that On-Chain, the company behind NEO and Ontology, they have a really big team of developers that supports this project and NEO. And so they're the ones doing a lot of this development. But it's good to see that features are still continuing to be built and issue trackers are still continuing to be addressed. One thing that Ontology really does need to improve is the tutorial game. Like, there's nothing out there in terms of tutorials that I saw that were modern enough or new enough that I felt like they would work for me. So that's one thing. If they could create a playground or tutorials or updated documentation step by step to get started and build something with Ontology, I think that would be very helpful. But that being said, the smart contract documentation was pretty on point and there was a lot there for it. Now there is a development environment called SmartX for smart contracts themselves, and it's a lot like Remix for Ethereum, which I use daily. So it was really great to see that is out there for developers to use on a daily basis. I'll definitely be checking it out. And for the Python development people out there, there's a really robust and well-maintained Python SDK out there for those Python developers who want to get involved in Ontology. And Python, for those of you who may not code yet, is a really good place to start. Go on codeacademy.com and learn Python. Definitely worth your time, and you could then start doing some blockchain application development with those new skills. Now, overall, I think the developer community and the support is there from the on-chain or the company side, the people who are building the platform. What I don't know is that I don't see a lot of developers out there that are not affiliated with the company building things on Ontology yet. And I think the same thing for Neo. There are some people developing for Neo, but not enough. They need to do more to create tutorials, to create ways for people to get involved, whether that be hackathons or grants, etc. Those are all good things that Ontology should be doing going forward. Now, a few parting thoughts for those of you who are still watching this video. Thank you very much for doing so, by the way. And the first one is that I did read a white paper outlining the plans for Ontology to implement sharding. And obviously sharding is a very important topic these days because it helps these platforms scale even more than they already are. And I think it's really good to see that Ontology is building out a framework for how they're going to implement sharding going forward. And I know that it's already being built in the back end and being tested with, so I'm really hopeful that we see that in 2019. And number two, the fact that KYC practices are in place for anyone who wants to apply or stake to become one of these consensus nodes in the system we talked about before, it concerns me a little bit. I understand why they're doing it, and I understand why it's important, because to try and get enterprises on board, it's kind of necessary. However, the one thing I worry about is if this puts too much centralized control in the hands of the Ontology Foundation. The consensus process, they've done a lot with that randomness and the segregation of duties to help avoid that centralization issue. But since they have final say on which nodes are blacklisted and who can be approved for consensus and consensus roles, that's definitely a concern. And I'm not saying that the Ontology Foundation or anyone there is going to do that. I'm saying that it is possible. And as we know, if it's possible, and you have to think about it. And finally, I think one of the things that I like the most is that Ontology is really going after one of the main problems in this industry right now, and that's adoption, education, and getting enterprises to experiment and jump on. We're not going to get a lot of companies out there to say, okay, we're going to go from fully centralized, totally private, and having everything in our own little bucket and between our walls and locked away, to having fully decentralized applications and being happy about it. They're not going to do it. And so we need something that's going to help them get there. And I think Ontology is a great way to start doing that by giving them an easy way to jump in, reap the benefits and the rewards of blockchain technology, make their applications and their data practices more user-centric, and sort of a soft start to this technology so that the ones that really get it and the ones that really want to invest can then take that and take it fully across the finish line to a more decentralized atmosphere or environment. And I think that's a really good way of doing it. Adoption's a problem right now. Companies not willing to take the risk and resisting this movement overall and not letting people have the responsibility and the control over their data like they're supposed to, like we all deserve. This is a good way to get them to do it. I mean, this is all normal stuff. This happened with the internet before. This happened several times in history. And you know what? Ontology is doing the right thing by creating an easy on-ramp for these companies to give it a shot, get out there and learn more about this technology. So I hope they succeed. So overall, I think Ontology is a solid project with a good overall mission. I think there are some missing pieces. I think that we need to see more developers and more things being built, more use of Ontology overall. But at the same time, I think that they're still building, and also Neo is still building. And we've got to see after DevCon for Neo, whether or not there's mention of Ontology interoperability between the two platforms and all that sort of stuff. Like I said before, I'll post a video about Neo after DevCon, but that's one of the key indicators for me. How is the approach going to change after Neo DevCon, and what are they going to build in 2019? And I think the other big factor is whether or not Ontology can get some big name industry players on board and using Ontology overall. And I don't know how easy that's going to be. I know they have a lot of partners in China, but I think they need some more international partners to really bring this to life. And so we're looking at that this year in 2019 as one of the key indicators for whether or not Ontology can be successful. Both Neo and Ontology, they're both on mainnet. They both have a good base there. They need work, and Neo 3.0 hopefully is coming soon, and hopefully they can reinvigorate the project because it's been very slow lately. And Ontology is kind of in the same boat. They need industry partners. They need a roadmap. They need to build out some of these new features to keep them competitive, and they need people to start building things. That is really important. So I'm looking into 2019 for both Neo and Ontology to make a splash. Hopefully they can realize their potential and really deliver something awesome, and I'm really stoked about it. Now guys, don't forget to watch some of my other Token Talk Tuesday videos. I will leave them linked on the screen right here for you to click. Thank you guys very much for watching. Cheers.